Well, Craig, thanks for the invitation for putting this together. It's been a blast since I started. I mentioned I started 2 years ago, and working with Craig Dink and Jay Wisby with those Milo plots has definitely made it happen, basically. And as I mentioned out in the field, right, what we're going, I'm sorry, Jeff mentioned a little bit about the stalk rot problem, right? When you think about the disease in Kansas, we do see a lot of foliar, you know, leaf spots here and there, a little bit of northern corn leaf blight, green leaf spot, but nothing to the point that we have to spray and control something. But when we think about stalk rots and what we're going to be talking today, I'm just going to focus on that. I think that's the point where I'm going after, right? And going after, I mean increasing yield wise and also profitability. If we can do that by managing stock rots and tackling it different ways, and today I'm focused mainly on the fungicide, right? But that's where my program focus has been on the Milo side, right? And when we think about sorghum in Kansas since 2010, it got a little ramp up in terms of harvest acres over the years. We're starting to see a big shift, especially from wheat and a little bit more of corn and soybeans, but sorghum is still there, right? Although it might be a big jump from wheat and corn and soybeans, when we think about dollar signs, I think like sorghum's right there with wheat, head to head, in terms of how much money you folks are bringing back to Kansas, right? And I think that's why it's important. That's why I've been tackling that sorghum as well, together with corn and soybeans. So as I mentioned about stock rots, every year in Kansas, and Doug Jardine, my predecessor, has been look at this for many years too. We estimate about 5% of our yield it's being taken by those stock rots. And 5% doesn't seem much, but when you put in that perspective, we're losing about $50 million every year for the stock rots. And we do see it, and we see the plant lodging late in the season. That's already like too late. It's going to be a headache for us to harvest, and definitely a yield impact right there, right? I think more important for me, it's the yield that we're losing, but we're not seeing. Reduce the number of ears, head size, poor filling of grain, early head lodging. We do see it sometimes too. But together these two, that's where we come with this 5% yield reduction across Kansas, right? And if we go out in about 2 or 3 weeks in the field that we would just wear and start splitting stock, it's just amazing to see how much disease is out there. Even before we see lodge. Last year, Jay and Craig were out there splitting stocks, and we're just like, wow, this is a lot of disease that's just been sitting there waiting for that windstorm, which in Kansas, right, it just seems like every other day. But again, that's where we're coming from, right? In terms of, this is a experiment that was done a couple of years ago. And we have here hybrids and lines and a control and different types of stock rods. So we have the fusarian, which we can find 3 kinds of them, 3 species, and one which is the Macrophomina phaseolina. They're both fusarian Macrophomina, very hard to manage. And one of the reasons is they infect so many crops. Think about corn, soybeans, sorghum. They're kind of like a multi-crop. And when we get into weeds, there's like a 500 list of potential crops and weeds that those pathogens can infect and survive, right? And as you can see here, regardless of the pathogen that we're fighting, the stalk rot, they all had a good impact on that yield, right? Against the non-treated control, or the control in that case. I mentioned about Macrophomina, which is the charcoal rot. We see it in sorghum, we see it in soybeans, and we see it in corn, right? In sorghum and corn, what we see is that shredded pith, and the structure that you see, that blackish structure, look like a pepper-like structure. It's called macrosclerotia, that in other words, just to survive in that soil for many years. And we're talking about like 10 years, that infection can be there just waiting for the host, right? So again, just remember that charcoal rot, we do see that pepper-like structure and shredded pith, right? I mentioned before, over 500 plant species in 100 families, very, very aggressive pathogen that we deal here in Kansas as well. And the other one is the fusarium group. And the picture that Jeff showed early with the aphid, you know, if you guys remember, if you guys were paying attention to Jeff, but so it was more on that reddish side, right? So reddish, pink, salmon, independent of the hybrid, we see different aspects too. There you go, that pinkish salmon again. Kind of like the same problem, right? Premature death, lodging, and the symptoms now look a little bit different than charcoal rot. So again, another challenge is both charcoal rot and fusarium, right? Overeaters, the corn residue, sorghum residue, temperatures hot and dry. And it's kind of like every other year, right? We always face high temps, low water, it rains here, not there, and it's kind of like that every year. And that's why stalk rot is kind of like a big problem for us, and it's important to think about it. Again, premature death, lodging, different from charcoal rot. We don't see that shredded anymore. It's more on that pinkish reddish discoloration of the pith. Management wise, and it's kind of like what got me into looking more into fungicides and different spray technologies. You know, avoid root damage, control of insects that Jeff mentioned, disease, weeds, and timely harvest. And when we look into the overall stalk rot, right? Of course, choosing good stalk strength and stay green characteristics. Just we want to make sure that you guys can get that grain out of the field before it flies. Balanced fertility is very important. Avoid high plant populations, root damage, again, insect disease control and weeds. Timely harvest is more kind of like let's get that grain out of the field before it flies. And late in the season, a lot of things happens, and Jay is kind of like always calls me like with fields that and it's like it's all in the ground, right? Anything that you do to preserve moisture and reduce that stress also helps. There are hybrids that are better than others, but it's still this is kind of like our current recommendation for managing stalk rot in Kansas, and that's kind of like what got me into looking in other options, right? So we're going to talk about this sorghum fungicide trial. There was a grower out in Bavaria that Jay Wisby founded for us. He was doing Milo. It was 2 years, right, Jay? So in this field here, he basically like, guys, you know, just take it. There's a lot of lodging, a lot of problems in this field. And I'm kind of like, I just don't know what to do because that rotation of corn, soybeans, and sorghum just doesn't help, right? And then FMC has this active ingredient called flutrafol, which we use on foliar application. It's been widely used for a while now. But now what we are doing is we're starting to see this more applied at planting. And we also did it at meat flour, right? Just a little bit of background, flutrafol is a group 3 DMI fungicide. And in this trial, we look at in-furrow, dribble over the top 2 inches off the furrow. And a lot of the questions behind here, it's more if we would be causing any phytotoxicity at planting with that product, right? Sometimes we do see some kickbacks when we try to do those things at planting, right? So that's what we were doing. Xylate LFR just stands for liquid fertilizer ready, right? So it's something that potentially you could be mixing with your fertilizer, your sturdy fertilizer into your crop. So this was last year. We were out planting. This is just Craig Dinko, Jay, my student medicine, and Angel. And here's just our plot planter when we're out there. So now I have like a sequence of photos from those plots from last year. We were there for a field day and then just taking some pictures. Again, we didn't see any foliar disease as expected. So here I have the non-treated control. That one is Xyway applied 15.2 fluid ounce on the 2x2, 2 inches off the furrow and 2 inches down into the ground. That one, it's dribble over the top, right on top of that furrow, right? That same rate. Dribble over the top, but 2 inches off the furrow. And last one was up kind of like a lower rate of Xyway, 10.5, followed by a top guard EQ, which is fluotrifol plus azoxystrobin at that mid flowering, right? When we're about like 50% flowering, that we did. And last, it was just that foliar application at 5 fluid ounce of top guard EQ, which is fluotrifol plus azoxystrobin. Overall, just looking at the plots, no difference. I didn't see any negative impact at that point, and no benefit from those applications, either at planting or at beginning of flower, right? Now, when we look at the yield results from those plots, here I have the non-treated control with about 56 bushels per acre, and all the treatments, regardless was at planting or later in the season, average about 7.4 bushels per acre more than non-treated control. The question is, how did that happen? And that's where we're looking into the stalk rots. So here I have the 2x2 dribble over the top, 2 inches off the furrow, Xyway plus top guard EQ, and just top guard EQ. Now here is kind of like where it starts to be even more intriguing and trying to understand what those products are doing to the crop, right? I mentioned there was a double crop milo, and they were having a lot of stalk rot problem. So I have the non-treated control, and guys, this was a lot of work because we had to split every stalk, I think it was 10 stalks per plot, and count the number of nodes and internodes with stalk rots. So and then we did just a percentage. So on the non-treated control, it was about 35% of those nodes, internodes with stalk rot. And when we look into the Xyway, 2x2, which is we're putting 2 inches off the furrow, 2 inches down, we are like we still have disease there, but we had a 10% reduction on the stalk rot. The 0x0, I didn't see much difference. It's just a placement, right? Spray technology. Now, the over the top 2 inches off the furrow, it was kind of like starting to get a little bit closer to that 35%. And when the lower rate, I think we see a big jump here. And just the foliar one, it's pretty much the same of the non-treated control. So this is still preliminary data, and we're still like what we did this year. We're repeating this trial right here. We have two varieties, two pioneer varieties, one very susceptible to charcoal rot, the other one very susceptible to charcoal rot and fusarium. So, and one thing extra that we did was instead of using 4 reps, we're doing 6, just to try to get the variability a little bit more distributed across the field. So I know everything here is preliminary, but again, like that's kind of like what it got me really excited when I started seeing this trend. Do you guys have any questions about it? Are you guys doing any starter fertilizer right in the beginning? I haven't done both together, and maybe something that we should be looking at too. But it would be, I guess, something to keep in mind. And this year, I'm sure Craig can share the data with you guys too after we harvest here. Rain mold, as we move forward, and hopefully we get some rain, which we need. Just keep in mind that rain can bring also mold into the head, into that panicle, right? That cool and wet condition, they're kind of like the perfect storm for grain mold, although it would take the rain at any time. It's kind of like for sorghum, it's not dangerous to livestock, but I think the biggest problem with the gray mold, this is a very late stage one. But the biggest problem is it can reduce yields depending when it starts, poor seed quality, but especially reduce germination. I don't think it's a big concern in our area, but just keep in mind. And eventually can lead into more storage problems, right? Our kind of like recommendation, it's always easy to say it and do it. If you have gray mold problem, you really need to dry it down as much as you can and keep that in low temperature, right, below 50%. They are better hybrids. Browns and reds are more resistant due to the higher levels of tannin. Timely harvest, as I mentioned before, and do not storage for long periods of time. We have, as Jeff mentioned, the diagnostic lab that's there available for you. If you ever have any questions, you can send a sample to us. And of course, always contact those guys. They're always available and willing to get out of the office for a bit. We have a Twitter and a Facebook page. Trying to keep it busy, but not too busy. Make sure to follow us there and be glad to take any questions.
Rodrigo, listen, we're showing last year's data where more of a continuous crop situation. And this year, we kind of flipped. Bavaria didn't turn out, and ours looks like Bavaria did last year, but ours is not continuous. It's been a rotation has been a mile way, and we won't have a season structure like we had Bavaria last year. Any thoughts on preliminary?
Greg, I think my experience with corn and soybeans is, those fungicides we should be tackling fields that with history. If we know that we had problems here before, and it could be like last year, but 2 years ago, those two pathogens, charcoal rot and fusarium, they're gonna be there for a while. And we're talking about 5 years. They're very persistent in that soil. And I know might be a long answer to your question, Craig, but I think there's still potential of us seeing benefit from it. I know we're kind of like in the blind side in regards to this field. But yeah.
Okay, so it'll be interesting to see the data that we get off of it, and be interested to see where we haven't had a history of sorghum like Galen. How many years has it been since sorghum's been on that field? First year started with lots of so it'll be interesting to see the results, and if we get another yield bump with the fungicide trials and that.
Right. Yeah, and the other thing that we have here too, and you guys should be on the lookout for, is our plant population row spacing trials, just to see what are the take homes on the. I know you guys have a lot of information, the agronomy perspective, but on the disease side too, what we're looking for. But anyway, thanks so much.
Thank you.